Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show with your host, David Lawrence.
Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources Podcast Show. Today, I'm delighted to have with us John Furneaux. John is the CEO of Hive in New York. John, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, David. Good to be here.
John, nice to speak to a fellow Brit. I know we're in the middle of a pretty serious pandemic at the moment. 100-year, not happened in the history of our lives. How's it going over in New York for you?
It's good. It's obviously difficult time for lots of different people, and New York's obviously been badly hit. From a Hive perspective, we moved to work from home pretty early on in the experience. So hopefully our team is sort of safe and well at home, and we're doing what we can to help those who find it hard to get out and about and get groceries and all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. And John, why don't you give us a little bit of background about Hive as a company and also what it does, how you add value to your customers, and how the company came about in the first place.
For sure. So company came about since leaving university. I've always been obsessed with helping teams work together, helping them accomplish their goals, whether they're physically together, whether they're separated. And I did that for a consulting company for some time, then for a product company, and in the end felt I had a clear vision of how that sort of product and platform could work. So Hive was kicked off about 4.5 years ago, and is hopefully the manifestation of that vision, right? So we're 65 people. We provide the collaborative work tools for people like Google, Netflix, Uber, Starbucks, thousands of smaller teams. In the time, as we're speaking now, we're in the midst of the COVID crisis, and one of the things that's been very meaningful, actually quite moving, is that we've been getting hundreds and hundreds of thank you notes from around the world from teams who got Hive and now are able to keep their business running remotely and from home, even though this is such a difficult time and it's so stressful for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of how you obviously saw an opportunity in the marketplace, or more importantly, there was a problem. How did the business take off and start? How did that come about?
So I'm a firm believer in simplicity, whether that comes to startups or anything else. How did Hive start? Hive started with a big spreadsheet where I wrote down across the top all the things that I thought people might want from a work tool that might be annoying them about their current situation. And down the side, I had the names of interviewees, and I filled out X's in the boxes for the things that they wanted to see. And by the end of about 4 weeks of begging people and bribing people with coffees and sandwiches and beers in some cases, I had a matrix of the top, where there was 15 things that people wanted from a platform, and that was the birth of Hive.
Amazing. I know if you're from the UK, you may know Hive as a smart energy business. Not so there, but you obviously got the hive.com domain. Is there a story in that?
There is a story. That one I have to be slightly more careful on.
Okay.
But I tracked down a very elusive person who was the owner of that. And I'm delighted to say that they were so excited about Hive that they are now an investor in Hive. So they're a full part of the journey, and we're delighted to have the domain.
Brilliant. And you're obviously, as you said, your customers are global. But your teams are based generally in New York and San Francisco. Is that right?
Yeah, almost all the teams in the New World Trade Center in New York. It's we're very sort of proud to be there. I feel I lived in San Francisco for a long time. For me personally, I find it very exciting and fulfilling to be physically close to our customers. We can show them things and whiteboard with them and understand where we've got something that's not quite right, how to make it perfect. Mm-hmm. If you think about the area around New York, the concentration of super exciting dynamic industries like agencies, like advertising, law, finance, these things are all a beating heart of New York. And we enjoy the fact that we are literally a walk away from so many of the teams we work with.
What just out of interest, what would a typical customer look like for yours that would get the most value out of the product generally?
Yeah, for sure. So if you think about a tool like Google Drive or Dropbox or Gmail or Microsoft Teams, these kind of products, like genuinely they have applicability to lots of teams, big or small, in different areas. the people who we automatically know will enjoy it is anybody who is distributed team. So maybe you have some people working from home or some people working from different offices, because there you automatically have the challenge of what is Bob working on today? What is Lisa working on today? Because you can't say it straight across the desk. And then in terms of types of company, it's completely across the board. Our first ever customer was a smaller sign making company from outside of Evanston, Illinois. And probably by people count, our biggest customer is probably Google. As you can imagine, a small sign making company and Google Corporation are very different beasts. And yet the reality is that human beings are human beings. And one thing I learned over the years prior to Hive is that it's easy to assume that a team at Google or a team at Netflix is somehow materially different to your team of 5 people in a small business. And the reality is, all of us can only really work with a group of 10 or 12 people. So the fact that we all have the same company on our name badge, or that we all go to the same canteen, or that we're all in the same big building, doesn't change the fact that I'm still working with 10 people. And the vision and the mission of Hive is keep it simple, make it really easy to work effectively with the 10 and 12 people around you, and then wrap the good security and scalability so that you can take 100 of those 12 people pods and have a coherent plan for all 10,000 of you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Sounds great. And I love your passion about it as well. It's coming through very loud. Look, I'm going to jump in the questions now. Tell me what a typical day in the business looks like for you as the leader.
For sure. Well, you'll think I'm plugging the product, but of course it's reality. We eat our own dog food. One of the things that was life-changing for me in terms of daily productivity, I was the worst criminal for the 9-tab, problem, right? And you realize that you've spent the last 15 minutes really just clicking on the next tab to see if there's something fun to do in there. And oh no, there's not. Okay, I'll come back to that, but whatever else. So I'm tremendously grateful that now I live in just 2 windows. I've got Hive and I've got Google Calendar. And that's the only place I live in the working day. Wow. For me personally, I think exercise early in the day is super helpful. It's really good to get your brain going. That's important to me. And then during the day, I'm lucky to have a team of people who are much more competent in their area than I am. So I hope that I spend my day as a sounding board for them as they go accomplish their goals. So for me, it's Hive's telling me what's going on and giving me a pulse. And then I'm trusting the senior people on my team to execute better than I could in the areas that they own.
Who has had an impact on you as a leader? Perhaps someone who's you've worked with in the past, or someone you aspire towards, and how have they impacted you and helped you?
Well, it's a strange one. He won't remember me, but I remember him. There's a man called Matthew Whitson, who is still at Capgemini, I believe. And my first ever sort of proper job, Matthew Whitson asked me to do some photocopying. And the people around me, the sort of junior people just starting in the workplace, were turning their noses up at this photocopying because they were tremendously smart, fresh, young graduates, and that was great. But I'd actually spent the last 3 or 4 years washing dishes in kitchens, during college and stuff. So to me, this was a tremendously exciting and difficult and challenging thing to do. I've been trusted with the photocopying. So I went and did the photocopying, and I made friends with the man in the photocopying room. And I looked at this thing that Matthew had asked me to make, and I knew he was taking to presentation, but it was so messy. And I asked this nice man in the photocopying room, I was like, you don't have any kind of like binder, do you? So this is going to look neater when he goes into the meeting. And the guy said, oh, fine, yeah, I'll get you one. Does this binder? And I present this thing back to Matthew, and he says, how come it's bound? And I said, well, I thought it would look better in your meeting if it was bound. And that small kind of attention to detail and simplicity, he then sort of took me forward on all his projects. And we worked together for, the following 2 years together. And he taught me everything I knew around soft skills and how to manage with emotional intelligence and all those things. And I sort of learned the lesson, do the small things well, and the rest will follow. And I'm grateful for his mentorship in hopefully working well with other people in an organization. Does that make sense?
That's a great story. And it is, you're so right about the small things. It's those small things. I hope that we will try and copy in Matt on LinkedIn at some point when
Yeah,
we get this.
he'll laugh because I'm sure he's forgotten it many years ago.
How do you keep your employees engaged?
So for us, a few mechanisms. So we do what we call Happy Hive Friday stand-up, which is simple format. Round the room, everybody is asked to share one shout out to another team member for something that really helped them that week. We originally did a sort of more traditional format of something that went well, something that went badly, but we felt that you can actually get a step further if you're shouting at somebody else, because all the accomplishments of the week still get shared, but you also get the boost of realizing that somebody noticed what you did. And that's very, very successful for us. And of course, now that's remote. So we also get to see some awesome like Zoom backgrounds and stuff, which is super interesting. We also do virtual happy hours. Last night we did virtual trivia, which has been fun, and then virtual happy hours, of course. And then one thing that is slightly different to your question, but is really important to us. I stole it from a man called David Politis at Better Cloud, a great company here in New York, and it's a thing called user manuals. So before somebody starts at Hive, the very first thing they do before they join is they fill in what we call their Hive user manual. And what that is it's a series of questions about how you work as a person. So, and I mean as in how you tick, you know? So the questions might be, how do you like to give and receive feedback? What's one thing that annoys you in the workplace? What's one thing you love in the workplace? How can people earn an extra gold star with you? And you might think that the answers you'd get back are the same every time. My goodness, they are not. You get a question that is super straightforward, like, how do you prefer people to communicate with you? And you see diametrically opposed answers from people that you would assume would give the same answer. So one person would say, please God, don't come by my desk, don't ping me, don't whatever. I'd rather you collect your thoughts, arrange a meeting time, so I've got my thoughts clear and we can meet together. Perfectly understood, perfectly reasonable. But then you read the second person and they say the exact opposite. They say, I don't really like email. I don't like having my meetings booked out. Just swing by my desk and we can get it done there and there, then and there. Now, how else would you possibly know that desired working style without having asked the question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Do you, by the way, I meant to ask you, and I'll have to word this carefully, as a Brit in America, I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but has there been anything that you've imported from the UK, not objects, of course, that has added value to your business in a competitively friendly way with our fellow Americans?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So number one, I always say this, I do a sort of one-to-one with everyone when they join Hive. I think HR or the people function is different in the UK to the US. As a UK employee, I always felt that HR, to a large extent, would have my back, that was somebody that I could trust to go to if, for example, there was drug addiction within my family, or there was, you know, a financial problem in my family or amongst my friends, that they could be a source of assistance there. And I feel in the US, there's perhaps a more defensive posture in the people function, where somebody who's undergoing a very stressful situation would be scared that HR would find out. And one thing that we've instituted at Hive is to really reiterate over and over again, we are a source of help in your life, not a source of stress. That if you are going through something like that, a difficult situation, please God, come to us. We're trying to help you, not trying to reprimand you or catch you out or whatever else. So that's one thing I hope, you know, we're importing as a culture in Hive, and we encourage others to do the same. And the second one is America, and I spoke about this in an interview a couple of weeks back, America has a culture that is more competitive between a vendor and a customer, such that everything has to be in writing and everything has to be sort of like tied down and stuff. We have built a track record of, in a tool that's collaborative, right? Sometimes you have to prove it works. Like you have to prove it actually, it sort of turns out well. And one technique that we found that is tremendously successful, we engage in American business and we say, you can leave us after 90 days. We will do all the work of the implementation. And if you're not happy with it, you can leave. And they look at us funny, like, have you gone completely mad? Because I could take advantage of you. I can get all this rollout and then not pay you. But what's interesting is if you do a darn good job, actually you do build a relationship of trust. and they do follow through on their promises. And I think I'm proud that we run a business where we are true to our word and true to our promises. And if you build that reputation, I think it's a tremendous accelerant, because you know what I mean? You know you can work with somebody. It's not just every dotted I and crossed T in the contract. It's also that we're there for you in the good times and we're there for you in the bad times.
Wow, I love that. That's fantastic. That is fantastic, and that's a real true testament about your team and your ethos and your authenticity, basically. What's the biggest? I know, obviously, COVID-19. We can talk a bit about that. What's the biggest challenge you see business leaders facing right now, today?
Anticipating what's afterwards. Right now, the challenge is frankly on global health leaders, on political leaders, on people who understand the virus and the impact on communities around the world, and it's healthcare workers in the front line. Once they have worked their magic and helped us move forward to a safe future, then the burden will fall on, I guess still on the politicians, but then also on business leaders, team leaders, community leaders, to figure out how we bounce back. Economic downturn is not just about, rich people getting richer. It's also about, hardworking people working paycheck to paycheck and paying for their family and their food and stuff. And it's incumbent upon us to figure out how to reopen sort of commerce and allow people to get back to work without having, 1,000 people sat next to each other, coughing on each other. So we obviously hope to play our role in enabling a remote workforce, in a socially distanced workforce. What's the biggest challenge? We need to look beyond the crisis. There are experts dealing with the crisis right now. We need to answer the question, what comes next? How do we get countries around the world back up on their feet?
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
Very simple. It was given to me in a small training camp in France outside Paris by an American mentor who absolutely terrified the crap out of me. And she gave me this one-liner, which is, if somebody gives you feedback, whether positive or negative, there is only one possible allowed response out of your mouth. And that response is thank you. It is a wonderful technique to make sure that you hear feedback correctly. It does some sort of Jedi mind trick on you, where if you force yourself to say thank you, then you definitely listen to what they said. You cannot rebut it. You cannot say it's not quite true. You cannot say, yeah, but somebody else did it as well. In the act of saying thank you, A, you thank them for helping you because they did, and B, you force your brain to listen and chew it.
Love it. That's a good one. What's exciting you right now in your industry? What's really exciting you about it?
I think we are on the cusp of a once in a generation change again. Mm-hmm. I sometimes say to people, that email will not be here forever. And they sort of laugh at me and say, oh, I think you'll find it. Yeah, I think you'll find it will. And I say, cool. Were you also in the camp that thought that memos posted in pigeonholes to let people know what was going on would live forever? And I'm sure there was some person that came along and said, did you know you can now send a mail through a computer? And everyone sort of sat in a circle and chuckled and said, well, that's never going to take off because I don't even have a computer. So clearly the world tells us that unless it turns out that from cavemen and cavewomen sat around a fire through the history of humanity, unless email turned out to be the crowning pinnacle achievement of the human race, we know that something else is coming next. Look at our social lives. People used to email each other in their social lives, and now they're in platforms. Bizarrely, people still email each other and use the shared drive and all these things in the work world. That is not going to stay forever, and we are seeing the green shoots of what will come next. We've seen tools like Slack, which saw tremendously fast adoption because people knew that there was a better way. And now we're seeing a raft of tools that just hint at this new future. When you come into work in the morning, like your work is organized for you. Your day, you are helped to understand, what do I need to do next? What should I focus on today? You're not deluged with 1,739 unread goddamn emails and your brain is just frazzled,
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and you talk about this once in a lifetime change. If I speak to the people, my community, our network, professional network, the clients, obviously fundamentally with COVID-19, it's going to change the way people work and work from home. People who didn't need to go in the office anymore, but still need to be close to the business, and how they can engage that through platforms like yourself and others. How do you see that impacting? Because people won't need as much office anymore. People will, be traveling less because they will work, not everyone, but there will be a huge proportion of that workforce that says, I don't need to spend 2 hours anymore on the road going to that office. How do you see that impacting you, and also the solutions you've got?
Well, here's the strange thing, right? There are many businesses, especially large corporates, that said we can't do work from home. But
exactly.
They just did it. So no one ever again can make the argument in a meeting we can't work from home, because they just did it for 2 months. So I think your line of reasoning is exactly correct, because we just lost an argument every time that comes up in every boardroom in the world. So I agree that remote work is going to be hugely more, and also like flexible work, right? Some people out of the office, or people working different schedules and stuff. And there's really interesting implications of that on things like commute times, traffic, urban planning.
Yeah.
I think for tools like ours, I mean, you mentioned to me a moment ago, like, you, like many others, have offshore partners and whatever else. Now imagine that every single business has the same equivalent of people who are physically distanced. That's what's so exciting, because tech can help us now. It can help us. We do have video presence. We do have, audio and video. I personally believe, I guess I believe that what's next is the organization of work at a distance. So you and I can speak on a video call, and that's a pretty solved problem, right? It's great. But if you and I want to share what our agenda is for the next 6 weeks, how we're going to stay on goal, who's doing which piece, and in a larger organization, how does that roll up to our overall goals? I would argue 99% of the teams that you're listening, that listen to this podcast would look in the mirror and say, we're not quite there yet. You know what I mean? We're not quite at the point where we can set out a plan for the year and we understand what everyone's doing to accomplish that plan.
Is there a story you've got from your childhood thinking back, I know we just touched on it there a bit earlier, that influenced your work ethic in later life? Is there anything that you've got?
It's simply washing dishes, man. It is the thing from before. I just think.
How long did you do it for?
Oh, 6 years. Well, to be fair, I graduated. I was dishwashing, and then I graduated to wait staff, and then I got to the dizzy heights of bartender, which is the highest that you can go in that particular pub, and I enjoyed each part of it. I just think. I think it is. I hated it when my mother and father told me that it would be good for me to do an honest day's work, but it was transformational for me. It's a job where you are around lots and lots of people, and what I do now, I try and lead a team that makes tools for people to work together. Well, it's darn important that you've met quite a few people and that you've worked with people of different types. And secondly, like, don't keep things simple, keep things simple. Like wash the dishes, get them clean. And then when you're wait staff, pick up the food, get it to the table, get it there efficiently. It helps ground you in what matters in life. And what matters in life is often not a super intellectual mental model of the world. It's somebody's hungry, go make some good food and bring it to them. Somebody's eating off that plate, wash it. Now it's clean, now we can reuse it. And I think startup people too frequently have disappeared into a vortex of their own idea, and they can't boil down. So for us, for example, Bob and Lisa are working on a project. Bob needs to know what Lisa is working on today. That is a simple problem that we should solve well. What we should not be doing is talking about what is work, what is the concept of a team, what is the concept of a team and work. Other people in our industry are going around in circles on that. Meanwhile, we're making sure that Bob can see Lisa's work and that Lisa can see Bob's. Do you know what I mean by that? Simplicity. Pick a simple problem, solve it well.
Fantastic. Love it. John, this is a difficult one to answer maybe, but what's your crystal ball saying to you the industry is going to look like in 3 to 5 years' time? And how do you think that might impact your business model?
I think you need Bill Gates for that, because he seems to have a strong track record in being seriously ahead of the curve. So I don't know the answer, but for my industry, I believe that people will want to work well together for centuries to come. They certainly already have for centuries behind us. And I think we should understand our place in history. You know, history's a long time, right? And people have been striving to work together better for a long period of time. I believe that if you are humble and you focus on simple problems, you keep your tech fresh, and you keep listening to customers, you will evolve alongside the human race, alongside technology. So will you and I be speaking in a virtual world where, you know, we're 3D throwing things at each other and whatever else? I don't know. I hope so. That'd be quite fun. But whatever it is, Hive will be there ready. You know, we are already at the forefront of tech right now. It's the best collaborative technology that you can buy. It is my job and our team's job to scan the future, to scan the things that are coming in, and to follow the age-old adage, never do something first and never do something last. So, you know, scan the tech that's coming, pick the things that have the appropriate maturity to be used well, roll them into Hive, and make sure Hive is always at the front. Does that work?
Great advice there. I tell you, there's so much value in that, John. It's unbelievable. Anyone who's listening to that and thinking of their business, exactly that, first and last, stick to the middle. If you had your time again and we're just giving your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would you say?
Don't stress. Everything turns out well in the end. If you try hard and you try and be kind to others, I think it might be Barack Obama who said, you know, the arc of justice bends in the right direction. You know, he certainly put it better than me. No, I think be kind and work hard. These are age-old things that do bend in the right direction. And sort out your green card significantly earlier, so you don't spend 7 years in the bowels of the United States immigration system. So that would be one practical thing. What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. I think for me, resilience trumps everything.
Yeah. Nice. I like yours is much better than mine. I like that. Agreed. Tenacity. Yes, agreed.
John, thank you so much for giving me your time. I know you're busy over there and a difficult time, so thanks so much. You got an amazing company. You got an amazing team from what I've seen. If people want to connect with you, find out more about the company, reach out, what's the best way they can do that?
Open book. We're super transparent at Hive. My email is John, my first name with an H, John, at hive.com. Anything that I can do to give people advice or help them on their own journey, I'm more than happy to. So yeah, that's the best way to get in contact with me is shoot me a note.
Fantastic. And if you again go to the website hive.com, you'll find out more about it, and you can check out the product as well. John, thanks for joining me, and all the best.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you so much for your time.
We really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you want to listen to more exclusive tips and life lessons from our guest, go to the resources page at vineresources.com.